This belt was shot on a spotless clean background. When I access the levels and drag the leftmost slider to the right, it doesn't reveal any dust or dirt. There's just one tiny dot, which is next to nothing. Working with backgrounds like this one is awesome, but it only happens a short while after the background has been changed. This purity doesn't last long. In a couple of days or even hours, it might get a bit dirty. This background looks more or less clean, but it's in fact quite worn and it's also scratched. You might not notice that, especially if you have a high contrast monitor, but I know how customers love to push their laptop screens away from their faces so that they can see all the details. So a background like this requires some cleaning just to make sure there are no scratches or anything like that. This background is seriously dirty. It's not like it's a big deal, but you have to clean it thoroughly. Maybe it's the right time to learn how to do it properly. I hope you remember the dust and scratches trick we use when we clean small trash from smooth surfaces. A typical studio background is a smooth surface, which means you can use the same technique. In case you forgot, I'll remind you really quickly. You use some blurring filter, like the dust and scratches, to get rid of the dirt on the whole image. Then you select the history brush source at this step, and then you click on the step just before that to undo the filter effect on the image. Now, if you use the history brush, it will be applying a dust and scratches effect wherever you use it. This is a good method of dirt removing if your surface is smooth, of course. It's just that the dust and scratches filter is not the best tool to use when you deal with backgrounds. If I used a radius big enough to smudge all these huge chunks of dirt, like 30, it would also severely damage the shoe. So if I do that, I have to be very careful with the history brush as I come close to the edges. If I touch the shoe, it gets ruined. But if I used the surface blur filter instead of the dust and scratches, I would be able to avoid this unpleasant side effect. At radius 30, threshold 30, the dirt is gone, but the shoe still has its edges more or less the same. I shouldn't, of course, use the history brush directly on it, but I won't ruin the shoe if I come close. This is much better than the dust and scratches, but I must admit that the surface blur is a bit slower. Nevertheless, it's a great method, but if you want to record an action straight away and use it for all your backgrounds if they look about the same as this one, wait a bit. In the next video, I'll explain how to get rid of posterization caused by the use of filters like surface blur and dust and scratches. This background is terribly worn, and you can see multiple stiletto heels indentations. The deal is that if you're not isolating, backgrounds should not be worn and dirty. Photographers should change them more often as it requires a lot of time and effort on our side of the table. The paper is even torn in one spot, which is not a good thing at all. You can still try and use the surface blur with the history brush trick to clean the whole thing. It will remove all the indentations, all except for the tear, which can be easily dealt with if you switch to the spot healing tool. But unfortunately, the indentations will not be removed completely. If I use the levels to darken the image, you'll see that the background looks spotted. You can't really use the surface blur for background cleaning all the time. It's pretty efficient when you have smudgy dirt, but as it's supposed to preserve edges, edgy dirt will most likely stay. When I tried it on the image with the shoe, radius 30, threshold 30 was enough, but this image has some holes that refuse to be blurred. You have to increase the threshold to 60 to get rid of them. Pins, no matter how thin they are, will also remain, just become less visible. And you know what? If I just used the dust and scratches filter with radius 15, it would eradicate all the holes and pins and everything. Just make sure you stay away from the edges. But once again, if I use the levels to darken the image, you'll see that color transitions are not smooth anymore. You can see a visible edge where no edge was present in the original image. And here we come to the problem number one in background cleaning, the posterization.